Good afternoon, I'm J. Lenora Bressler, and welcome to the October 3rd, 2017 edition of the Bible, Delight in the Details, as we are in a multi-session series on overlooked details of the Exodus narrative. We are at the very end of chapter 14 today. We have just crossed over the Red Sea. And there has been a joyous celebration, as is appropriate, with singing and dancing. We know from Psalms that Moses even wrote a psalm, a hymn for the occasion, which has been preserved for us. You might want to check that out in the Psalms. And all seems well. But then at the very end of chapter 14, we're told that they went 3 days from that glorious deliverance at the Red Sea, where the hand of God was so clearly evident. 3 days into the wilderness. And then they thought they had found water, but the water was bitter where it could not be drunk. And so they grumbled, they murmured, mumbled against Moses. And then Moses went to God and said, "What do I do?" And God told him to take a log and throw it into the water, and the water became drinkable. But to this day, that area of the desert is known as Marah, which is Hebrew for bitter. And for those of you who are Bible scholars, that perhaps is ringing a distant bell in your mind, because in the beautiful story of Ruth, the mother-in-law Naomi, who is so bitter because of the way that life has turned against her, when she returns to her homeland, says, "Don't call me Naomi anymore, but call me Marah," which means bitter. Now, this is a passage that probably many of us have heard preached and taught over the years. And generally, let's be honest, it's taught pretty much the same way every time. And that is with a little bit of a self-satisfied smugness and very judgmental that, look at these stupid Israelites, 3 days after the great deliverance at the Red Sea. And what are they doing? They're complaining already. What a lack of trust. What a lack of faith. And then, of course, generally you throw in, but of course we're all like that too. But the truth is, we really are very judgmental of these people. But I want you to really think about something. There are whiners, and then there are people that are bringing up very valid concerns and complaints. Was the fact that there was no water after 3 days of several millions, perhaps, of people walking through the wilderness, was that a valid concern? And I think it was. Think about it. Many of my friends have suffered without power in the aftermath of Irma. And you know how difficult it is, even with modern conveniences. And most of you did not lose water. You lost electricity, but you still had water. What if the water was gone too? And in a desert land. It's very frightening. And these folks had never been out of the desert. They had only Moses to go on. Moses, and of course the God that he was claiming to represent. So, is this a bunch of whiners, or did they have a valid concern? And I think they had a very valid concern. The problem is not what they were complaining about. The problem is how they went about addressing the issue. It says that they murmured, and the Hebrew here is the connotation of not wanting to be overheard. So it's very clear they did not go to the horse's mouth, so to speak. Either one. Not Moses directly, and not to God. They just murmured and questioned rather than going to the source and saying, "Hey, we have a problem. What are we going to do?" I think sometimes we as human beings, we feel like maybe we shouldn't just go to God and say, "So God, how are you going to get me out of this?" Because we think that we have to do something, and that God's going to be like, "Well, you shouldn't just be coming to me. You should already have a solution. You should already have an idea of what to do." And indeed, that is what we teach in leadership, is it not? We tell employees if there's a problem at work, don't just go to the boss and say, you fix it. We tell them, come with a solution. But it's not the same with God. With God, God is not going to think badly of you if you respectfully come and say, like a child, like a little child would, Daddy, I'm in a mess. What do I do? What can you do to help me? How are you going to help me get out of this? In fact, I think the more puffed up, prideful, I'll come with my own solution to God and then get it blessed is what God does not like. It's interesting that here again, as we talked last time, it is a piece of wood, which always makes me think about the cross, that turned something that was bitter into something that was sweet. And when you remember at all times that Moses is a precursor of Christ and points to the work of Christ, everything should be looked at for a symbolic meaning, as well as that it actually happened that way. Interestingly, we're going to talk about this tomorrow. They jumped the gun too. The Israelites jumped the gun because God had was clearly leading the Israelites and Moses to find something very surprising and very delightful. But they just jumped the gun. We'll talk about that tomorrow on the next edition of the Bible, Delight in the Details. Have a great night.